for example, I remember we talked a while ago and you told me that you grew up with a lot of different animals and you had
True.
dogs. Talk about that. Or maybe we talk about something else, but when you read what somebody else has said, then they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that Rachel remembered this about me. That's your first step in building trust, because you're not necessarily having to talk about work related things. You're talking about things that people actually care about. What are their passions? What are things that are personal about them that they shared with you? And they may forget that they even had that conversation with you, but you remember it. And it's those little things that really go a long way. And months could go by and I could remember something else that we talked about and maybe send you an article or just say, hey, I've been thinking about you. Things that really add up over time.
Stop having icky networking and actually start making it sticky. I'm not genius enough. I was not the person that came up with that. That's Rachel. And as soon as I heard that, I was like, we got to talk about this on a chapter on the business library because it's so catchy. And Rachel has a long backstory with a bunch of experience, and you can sum it up much better than I can, Rachel. So just quickly, tell us a little bit about who you are, what's your backstory, what makes you an expert when it comes to meeting new people and making them like you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. So a little bit about myself. I actually didn't really start networking until about about 2 years ago or so. My last full-time role, I was a chief customer officer at a food tech company, and I had worked my way up all the way to the C-suite. Wasn't sure what I wanted to do next. My entire career had been in hospitality, working in hotels and restaurants, and then on the tech side of things. So I did a lot of relationship building, but my network wasn't very wide or very deep. It was really just the people that I worked with and my customers, because I realized that I was a workaholic and I didn't spend time meeting people outside of what I was doing. It was just the people inside. And so I wanted to do something different, but I wasn't sure what that was going to be. And so when I started to network, or I started to look for my next opportunity, I realized I needed to network. And I thought, well, maybe I want to be a chief of staff. Let me see leadership from a different vantage point than owning my own vertical. But I didn't know if I want to stay in hospitality or even in technology or do something different. So I ended up meeting 40 different chiefs of staff between Fortune 500 and nonprofit and everything in between, just to see where I might fit and what would that look like. And that was really the beginning of my networking journey. And I realized that there is a skill set around networking, and a lot of people don't have that skill set. They're just told to go and do it. And in 1 year, I ended up meeting 300 people in one-on-one conversations, just like we're doing here on the podcast. And that's when I realized this is actually what my calling is. I need to help people to be able to make relationships easier for them to not just establish, but how do they keep that continuously going? And networking is really about those connections and connecting with others. And so that's how I ended up starting my business, Connection Catalyst, and becoming a networking coach.
I like that a lot. You kind of, when we talked about your midlife retirement, figuring things out. And I also wanted to touch upon, you mentioned there's a strategy to networking. And well, in my head, the first step to any logical networking strategy is how do we actually go out and find new interesting people? It's easy enough to find people.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I left my role as a chief customer officer, I had no idea what I wanted to do next, and I was too young to retire. So at first I was calling it my mid-career retirement, and then I changed it to my learning sabbatical, because that's truly what I was doing. I was just really learning. I read a lot of books, trying to understand what I might want to do as my next opportunity. And when I was going out to meet people, I was really expanding my horizons and just meeting all different types of people. I'm a big fan of Adam Grant. If you're familiar, he wrote the book Give and Take a long time ago. And within that book, one of the things that he talked about was expanding your network in different circles. And I think that is also very important, because if we're always talking to the same people over and over again, we are not really learning anything new. We're just recycling ideas. And so the more we can talk to various people, they can learn about us. We never know who they know. And then that can also generally help us too. So, for example, if you're an entrepreneur, you want other people to know what you're doing. They may become your partner, they may become someone that can support you. But even if you're not and you're working in corporate, it doesn't mean that someone else couldn't help you. So, if you're within a company, maybe there's someone from another team that should get to know you, or you get to know them that could benefit you and you're not even realizing it.
I love that you mentioned you never know what's going to happen. I
Yeah.
try to plan out my conversation. This is the most likely scenario, and this, that, the third. And then all of a sudden I realized the best thing that happened on a one-to-one call was things I couldn't have imagined happen.
Totally.
Because they were outside my spectrum, and on all of a sudden my perspective got opened up. And then, this wonderful thing. So I've kind of moved away from that. I will read up on the person, just get a bit of idea how did we actually meet, that kind of stuff, just to help get the conversation going, really. When you go out and look for people, is that a networking event, or are you using a LinkedIn outreach strategy? How do you get those people on the one-to-ones?
Yeah, so for myself and what I generally work with other clients on as well is start with your warm network. And what I mean by that is who are the people that you already know that you need to reconnect with? And once you reconnect with them, there's a framework that I use and that I teach called the 3 I's. So when you're having the conversation with someone, you often don't know how you might be able to support or help them or vice versa. And the 3 I's, the first one is an introduction. Can you introduce somebody to somebody else, or can they introduce you to someone else? That's actually how I got to 300 people. I didn't go looking for 300. I started with that 5 people is what I started with for the chief of staff, and got to 40 because I kept getting introductions to people. Oh, you need to meet this person, talk to this person. I didn't do more than that 5-person outreach, got me to 40. Then I started again, a little bit more, ended up getting to 300. I went to some of the community groups that I'm a part of, and that's how I also met quite a few people. So attending webinars or being a part of communities that you think are valuable to you. I always like to tell people, find one that you have an affinity for. So for example, I'm a woman, so I'm in a women's group. And my second one is industry related. So be in a group that is industry specific. You can be in more of those. Doesn't mean that those need to be the only 2, but when you're spending your time, we only have so much of it. And if you're in something that's affinity related and something that's industry related, then you can focus on both of those areas from a community perspective. And both will then allow you to meet people that are similar to you, but also could be different for you. So like in the women's group, I met people from all different types of industries, but in the industry related group, I'm meeting people that come from different backgrounds, but we all came from the same industry experience.
I see. So it's networking events is definitely the final answer, it sounds like, and not sending out a bunch of cold messages.
I mean, you still can send out cold messages, but I often find that people don't realize that so many of the connections that they already have are the people that are dormant, that they just haven't reached out to in a long time, are those that can often introduce them to people easier than you sending out cold messages. I'm not against cold messaging, but the chances of meeting someone through a cold message is less likely than getting introduced through someone that you already know. So why not use the people that already know you? They know you well, you've met them, they can vouch for you. People want to talk to people that they know, like, and trust. So if I know you, I'm going to send you people that I also know that I think that could be helpful.
And for you listening to this and actually is going to try this out, let me know if you have the same problem as me when I went through all mobile connections and realized I don't want to speak to 80% of these people. Like, nah. Oh, there's one nice one there. And that was basically, I went through all Facebook friends and stuff like that. And 80% I was like, nope, I am not going to have this conversation because there's nothing relevant or interesting to me we can speak about in any way, shape, or form. But we've kind of talked a little bit about finding new people, which is one part of the formula. But where the magic really happens is making that connection stick and building that relationship. So how do we go about doing that?
Yeah, so the big thing, honestly, is the follow up. How are you following up with someone? When are you following up with someone? The chances of them following up with you may not happen. So you need to really take the lead. And that's where people struggle the most. The key is honestly in the follow up. So I ironically actually had a LinkedIn post that I put out today around follow up. And I alluded it to the same way as a traffic jam, because that's where the traffic stops. That's where the connection stops, is you're on the road, you're driving, right? But then all of a sudden you come to the stop. It's because you're in a traffic jam or a networking jam, because you might send out a follow-up message, but they don't respond. And then you're like, I don't want to respond. I don't want to send another message. They may have forgot me. They don't want to talk to me. You have all these things that are running through your head. So one of the things I like to coach people on is just say, you want to follow up with that person. And you can simply say, I'd love to continue the conversation. What's the best way to follow up with you? Do you prefer email, LinkedIn, WhatsApp? What is the way that works best for you? And so that way you're communicating with them the way that they like to be communicated with versus the way that you want to be communicated with. And that is a big difference. The second thing is use the tools that you already have. So can you send a voice note versus an email? Can you send a video message instead of an email? Those things are always going to go so much faster, and it just makes it easier for connection. People don't always have time to jump on a phone call or to set aside that time, but if they can, great. But that's like, we never had voice notes before. We never had video messaging before. And sometimes I think we take these tools for granted when we can actually use them to our benefit.
Yeah, like I love voice notes. I love visual messages. You send a bunch of those. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
One thing, if I have something I really want people to respond to fast, I'm still going to send them a text message, because I can have the words show up. Like, this is something you're interested in and it's relevant for you and it's time. Like, I can fit all of that in without them having to click in and start listening to the message. Because I've noticed, I start noticing, sometimes when I send voice notes, my response rate was so low. And I think it's because people think I'll listen to this later, forget about it, and then it's a month later and they're like, oh, it's too late to respond, which it actually is. Have a bit of a laugh that you've forgotten, and that's actually a great way to build a relationship as well.
Totally. And that's a really good point. I get asked that question all the time. Like, when is it too late to respond? And my answer is never. It's never too late to respond, because you never know what could happen with that response. It doesn't even matter if a year went by, because there could be something else new that you're talking about. You could have a new opportunity that you didn't even realize existed. And we all change over time. Nobody's the same person they were yesterday. Nobody's going to be the same person in 3 months from now. And just talking about those connections again, or whatever the information is, even if it's not relevant, simply just say, hey, I was thinking about you, and reach out, because you just never know where the conversation's going to go.
Yeah, just don't be that person that says, a year later, I was busy. Just
right.
Either don't acknowledge it's there, or be upfront about it. I forgot your messages. You saw this to say I was thinking about you. Something like that.
Exactly.
Because that first one, people are like, nah, that's not true. You weren't busy for a year. I'm not buying that one.
And it's okay. If you forgot, you forgot. I mean, we're all human beings.
Exactly.
Just be natural about it. It's totally fine. Everybody messes up.
And when people don't get back to you, most of the time, at least over half, it's because they forgot. It's not because they don't like you or you said something wrong. They just didn't check, and then they checked and forgot about it, read it, and forgot about it, so it didn't pop up again. I like to always leave all of my messages unread. If I read a message on LinkedIn, I'm like, I don't have time to respond to this right now. I'm going to swipe it to the left and then hit unread, because then it's nice and ordered and I know who I'm getting back to, very visually. And we talked briefly about you really like networking events. How do you make people like you in that short 1 minute, 2 minute, 3 minutes that you only get when you first meet somebody in a networking event? Because you can't fit it all in there.
Yeah, totally. Networking events can be hard for a lot of people. It's really about the energy that you bring to that event and how you're best presenting yourself. And there's a really good book called Laws of Connection. I can't remember the gentleman's first name or last name that wrote it, but his first name is David. So if you look it up, it's David something, wrote the book Laws of Connection. But he said in there, the difference between introverts and extroverts when they go to events is that introverts tend to have low energy when they go in and high energy when they leave. And extroverts have high energy going in, and either they stay with the high energy or they have low energy going out because they used all their energy up. And so that's a big piece of it, is what is your energy going into that, and how are you showing up as your best self? If you don't want to be there, that shows through. It shines through to the other person that you're talking to, and you want to be your best self. So that's one thing. Get yourself pumped up, ready to go. Listen to a playlist. Put on a perfume that or cologne that you can smell that is not too heavy, but it just brings you back to present. There's lots of different tips that I have around your energy level. Maybe you do some box breathing ahead of time or meditation. Just get yourself in a place where you're ready to go. When you're actually there, your elevator pitch, which I don't even like using that word, but talking about yourself, how do you talk about yourself in a way that people can be curious about you? Not just, hi, I'm Rachel, I'm a networking coach. Well, that's cool, but who really cares? You want it to be something that stands out, that's a little bit more exciting, and it can be conversational. And then from the other side of things, when you're talking to someone, ask people questions that you're curious, that's going to get them talking. So when they get to an event, oftentimes people say, oh, what do you do for work? Get rid of that question from your vocabulary or from your repertoire. You can start with as simply as, oh, why did you decide to come here today? Or if there was a speaker, what did you like about XYZ speaker? Start with something that is around the event itself. And then the second thing, I have a framework called the 3 Ps. So what can you talk about with someone that's going to build connection quickly? The first P is passion. Can you ask someone about their passion? So what do they enjoy doing when they're not at work? If it's, I could talk about the weekend or the prior weekend or a holiday coming up. What do you enjoy doing on the weekend? You might learn more about somebody. The second P is personal. So what's something personal that you can get from somebody as well? And it could be as simply a question as, oh, what's something that's surprising about you? Or what's something that I wouldn't know about you?
Good
and
question.
The third question, or the third P, is problem. So especially for those that are looking for their next opportunity, ask somebody, what's the biggest problem or challenge that you have in your job today? Because when you help someone solve a problem, they're never, ever going to forget you. And it's a great opportunity to really dive in and learn more about that person. You might go back to the 3 Is. Is there someone that you can introduce them to? Is there somewhere that you can invite them to? Or is there information that you can provide them, whether that be advice, an article, a podcast? But using those frameworks in a short period of time, you just get you thinking a lot quicker, and you don't have to scrutinize over the conversation because things will just come to you more than you realize.
Yeah, once we start getting out of our own head is really a good thing. Getting into the zone, as you briefly talked about.
Exactly.
For me, it's the first time I started doing that one, because I am an introvert, I was anxious as hell. Now I've done it so many times, I'm like, okay, I know what I'm going to say. I'm going to have a little bit of a laugh, have some fun with people, can't say my name, all of that good jazz. Which is actually quite a good, because sometimes you get into a room and nobody knows how to start. And I'm just, let me start before somebody says my name wrong, give them a bit of a laugh. I think, that's one, my thing is, when you have that short amount of a time, my first thing is, I don't necessarily want you to know what I do. That'd be great, but it's going to be hard for me to really elaborate and go into detail with that briefly. I want you just to remember me. Remember that weird Danish guy.
Yeah, exactly. And you can also start with something as simple as a compliment, right? It doesn't have to be anything big. I love it when someone comes to a networking event and they are wearing an accessory, a shirt, a jacket, shoes, something that stands out. And men and women can do that. Like a lot of times men are like, oh, I can't dress different. You can have like a really cool sport coat, cool socks. Like there's so many things you could do. If you're wearing a jacket, you can have a pocket square. There's so many different things that you can do. But I'm based in New York City, and here we have one uniform for New Yorkers. It's all black. So you go to an event and everybody is wearing all black, unless you're finance, then it's khaki pants, a blue button down shirt, and a Patagonia vest. And then it's just a sea of blue everywhere. So it's one of the two. You don't want to be in that sea of everybody else. You want to stand out. So what can you do to stand out? Because then people are more likely to talk to you.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of ways, again, that you can start a conversation from a compliment that people get excited about, and also about your name. You know, I might say, your name looks so cool. How do you pronounce that? Because I want to make sure that I get that right. Or are you named after somebody? There may be ways that you can use people's name to get to know them too. And that's also a personal question. And how do you establish rapport off of that?
Yeah. And just ask the questions you're generally curious about. I think you mentioned that as well. Like,
exactly.
Listen there. Don't be worried about what your next question is. Listen to what they say and just let the questions come into your head as when they naturally speak, and then let the best one flow out. Like, that's when as soon as you get into your own head, it's like, ooh, what am I going to ask? And you like hit all of those like surface level questions.
Totally. Curiosity is key.
Yeah. And sometimes it's just like making a small little change to the traditional question. Because one thing, this is something I do on LinkedIn, but because I'm Danish, there's not a lot of Danish people. If I don't know what to say, I'm going to ask people, how are things in the US? How are things in Los Angeles? How are things in Belarus? I'm just going to name the country, because that kind of, like, it lets them answer the question a bit differently than they otherwise would have. And then another thing, which I learned from, I can't remember his name either, and I can't remember his first name even, so it's not better. But it's something called conversational threading, where like give a bit of like a detailed answer on a few things that people can ask you about, so you're actually interesting to talk to. Because then, if they're good conversationalists, they're gonna pick up on it and make your life a lot easier. And then, like after like getting off a networking event, how do you go about like building the trust? You followed up with them, they know you, they remember you, but they still need to trust you before anything happens.
Yeah, totally. I mean, again, going back to the follow-up is key. And often after networking events, that's when people drop out. So maybe I met 20 people in an event and then I don't talk to them again. A big piece of that follow-up and building that trust is, what does your conversation look like post-event? How are you bringing something back into that? And I really recommend people taking notes from that event. So I highly recommend creating a note, like use your notes app, whatever iPhone or Android you have, whatever notes app you use on your phone, so that you can actually write down things that you remember from the conversation and use that in your follow-up. So, for example, I remember we talked a while ago and you told me that you grew up with a lot of different animals and you had dogs and all different things. So maybe we talk about that. Or maybe we talk about something else. But when you remember what somebody else has said, then they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that Rachel remembered this about me. That's your first step in building trust, because you're not necessarily having to talk about work-related things. You're talking about things that people actually care about. What are their passions? What are things that are personal about them that they share with you? And they may forget that they even had that conversation with you, but you remember it. And it's those little things that really go a long way. And months could go by and I could remember something else that we talked about and maybe send you an article, or just say, hey, I've been thinking about you, because it's those little things that really add up over time. It's those micro steps or those micro pieces that we're adding on top of each other, that we're stacking, that's going to help build that trust. And I do want to say that not every single person that you're ever going to talk to, you're going to always build a relationship with. That's just not going to happen. But if there are people that you connect with, spend the time to get to know them, spend the time to understand who they are as people. And that's how trust will continue to get built.
A lot of good points. And especially that it's going to take some time, because I was definitely a victim of, when is things going to happen? I hear people get all these exciting introductions to clients, strategic partners, all of this good stuff. Where am I? Realize, not thinking about they've done this for a few years more than me at that point, and I just started out, and they actually built the network and built the relationships and trust over time. Like,
Yeah,
it's not a day-to-day thing. I think that's
exactly.
something
every
it's human's. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just going to say, if you want six-pack abs, you don't go to the gym today and expect you're going to wake up tomorrow morning with six-pack abs. It doesn't happen.
Everybody would have it. If that was the case, they would. I don't think, though, at least there would be no excuse for not having them at that
Right,
point.
exactly. So it's the same thing. It's like going to the gym. You have to practice. You have to build that habit, and it's just going to take time.
Yeah. Like, take also like a bit of time after the event or after a call, thinking about what did I like, what could I have done better. It's something I'm trying to be more and more aware of doing myself, even though I've done it a bunch. It's just such a great tool that I sometimes still take for granted.
Totally.
And another thing that I was very surprised by when I first started meeting people, because I was like, let's build this trust, let me show them what I can do, and I won't even charge them anything. People are not so quick to say yes, even though it's free. So how would you go about doing something for free for a person, getting them to say yes, to really just open the door, getting your foot in?
Yeah, I think a big thing with that is understanding what the pain point might be that you're trying to solve for them. And if you understand what their pain point is and talking about that, then they're more like, oh yeah, I probably do need that. Because even, still today when I talk about networking, I do a free webinar once a month, and everyone's welcome. I believe we'll probably have it in the show notes. But with the webinar, I often get people say, oh, I don't need that. Or I'm really good at networking. And then I have others that come and then they really enjoy. They learn something new every time that they come to the webinar. And sometimes if the people are saying no, or they don't want your help, then they aren't the people that are supposed to be in your wheelhouse. They're not the people that you're supposed to be around. The people that you can build a connection with, that are interested in your help, again, speaking to their pain points or what they might need, then those are the people that you want to have around. Not every person that you're going to meet is going to be the right person to be around. And sometimes I have to check myself, and I'm like, oh, I just got rejected because they didn't want to come to the webinar, or because that's one of the things that I give away for free. And I have to tell myself, this isn't a person necessarily that wants to learn or grow or to get feedback. And you know what? That's totally fine. And I'm okay with that. And they could also be busy doing other things, and they just the timing may not be right, which happens often. And so you can also say, is there another time that I might be able to talk to you? And some people have a problem with saying no as well. And then they say yes, and then they don't really mean it. So just for everyone listening out there, if you mean no, say no. It's really okay. Like, rejection is all right.
And don't be afraid of, if the person says yes, but you can feel it on a defense, to actually call that out. Not in a mean way, but just, it feels like you don't really want to go, but you may be too afraid to say yes. Like, if that's the case, just say no. I don't mind. We can still be the best of friends, something like that.
Absolutely.
Because I've definitely done that a lot of times. Also, worked in retail, know how many people are afraid to say either they don't have the money, it's too expensive, they don't like it, whatever. Like, let me think about it, I'll come back. Or put it aside, let me come back. 80% of them never come back. because I don't know what step over to say no. We
Yeah.
teach our kids, to be honest. I haven't teach my kids because there are none, but people do. And my
But it
parents
doesn't,
taught me.
yeah. It doesn't hurt to follow up, and you can follow up a couple times, depending upon your cadence, what that looks like. I mean, don't hound somebody, but um, following up and giving it, a few weeks or a few months, once a quarter, it really just depends upon what that thing is. And if they're non-responsive, then that's also a signal too. Like, it's okay, move on to the next person. You never know who's going to come back to you. I actually had somebody reach out to me today. I haven't talked to that person since April. It's November. And they're like, I wasn't in the right place to talk about networking then, but I am now, and I want to continue the conversation. So you just never know. I like to say it's about planting the seeds. You have to plant the seeds, and it's like a garden. You're going to have annuals and perennials, and you're going to have weeds. You got to work your garden. So what is coming up is really dependent upon what you're putting in. Are you watering it? Is it getting sunlight, or is it in the shade and the cold? And we're also going to go through seasons, right? So there could be, we're in the fall versus the summer versus the spring. Doesn't mean that the seasons are going to match the current season that we're in outside, but in general, your network is your garden. How are you working that garden? How are you ensuring that the people in your garden are those flowers, are those plants, are those vegetables that are coming and going? You're going to have some that are there all the time, some that are going to leave, some that are going to come back. And it's really more about maintaining that. What do you want it to look like all year round?
One thing as well, I've noticed, like, let's say a person says no or ghosts you or something like that. Whatever we get into our own head of the reason is probably a lot more extreme and vivid and than what the actual reason in the real world. It's a lot more boring and not as exciting or depressing, whatever way we're going.
Yeah.
Our minds like to go and play all kinds of tricks and do really play things up into something they're not. And talking about like our minds and coming things from ourselves, because one of the things that really stood out to me in our first conversation was that icky part of networking that I briefly mentioned in the intro. You said that came within ourselves. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, it kind of is to your point. A lot of people, as soon as they hear that word networking, it feels icky because networking, most people think of it as something that's transactional. I'm going to an event, I'm giving someone my business card, I'm going home. The old way of networking, especially in the US, is hanging out on golf courses. Yeah, you can still network with people that way, or it's going to a happy hour at a bar. There's so many other ways that you can make connections with people. And to your point, it's really about the mindset, because if someone doesn't get back to us, or someone says no, or we get a rejection, we're putting ourselves in a place where we are taking it personally. So there's a mantra that I learned earlier this year that I really like called Q-tip. So Q meaning quit, T taking, I, it, P personally. Q-tip. Quit taking it personally. And so if you think about it, whatever the outcome is okay. It's not because of you as an individual. If you're showing up as your genuine, authentic self and everywhere that you are, then you're putting your best foot forward. If the other people around you are not connecting with you, then they're not the right people that you're supposed to be connecting with. And that's okay. You're not going to be talking to every single person in the world. But when we realize that we are showing up as our best selves, and whatever anyone else is going through, it's not about us, it's about them, and we allow that to happen, it just makes it so much easier for us to flow in an event or flow in a conversation, because we're no longer putting that person's perspective onto us. We're just being ourselves.
Like, I've starting to listening to this audio book called Letting Go, which was actually because I've noticed that sometimes I get too much attached to the emotionally to that, for whatever reason. I was like, let me learn to let go a little bit more. And it was funny that I had this conversation with myself, and then this book popped up 2 days later. Funny how life like plays
I
things like
know.
that.
You're
Even though
manifesting it.
I would argue it's just because we are aware and therefore we pay attention to it. I do see more as the argument that I am a bit logical minded, but I am getting more and more into there. There might be something to this manifestation thing. There might be something to it. It's definitely not all just wee wee, as
Yeah.
I like to refer to it to. Some of it is, some of it is. But before I get completely off subject, I would like to just. Is there a final word you would like to leave the person listening to this with?
Yeah, I just like to say, regardless if you feel you've been networking for a long time or you are just getting started, everyone can do it. But when you make networking a habit, your life is honestly more fulfilled because you are making the connections with people that is going to make you a better person throughout your life. And you're going to be making impacts on people that you don't even realize. So when it comes to your legacy, it's really about the people that you've impacted and the relationships that you built. And that's what's going to carry you through your entire life, not just from a professional standpoint, but also from a personal standpoint.
Beautifully said.
Thank you.
One of the most important things, more important than a lot of other things we value very highly, probably a little higher than we should. And besides the webinar, is there any other things you would like people to go check out that's logical after listening to us talk about networking?
Yeah, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or follow me on LinkedIn. I put out lots of networking content. If you are based in New York City listening, I do small group dinners for executives and entrepreneurs twice a month. So you're more than welcome to apply to come to those. And it's a great small group facilitated conversation. You meet people from all different industries, genders, generations, and it's just a fun conversation to have and be a part of.
And that is, of course, going to be down in the description below, just like the webinar. So it's nice and easy. You don't have to type things, because I am one of the people that's too lazy to do that myself if somebody tells me to do it. And just thank you very much for taking the time to come on the Business Library, having this wonderful conversation with me. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I really glad to be here.